Sean.
Marco.
We are here to deliver a message from the RSA conference team.
It's an important message from our friends. RSA Conference 2025, just around the corner, where insights drive action, solutions emerge, and community connections spark innovation. You'll be there. I'll be there. We invite everybody else to be there April 28th through May 1st. You can secure your spot at rsaconference.com/ITSPMAG25. That's ITSPMAG25. See you all there.
I'll be there. See you there.
And hello, everybody. You're very welcome to a new Redefining Cybersecurity podcast. I'm Sean Martin, your host. Where if you listen to the show, you know I get to talk to loads of cool people about cool topics. And one that's near and dear to me is the concept of a hacker. They generally get a bad rap in media. And my co-founder Marco and I have spent a long time hoping to reframe what a hacker is. They're generally good people look to do good things in both public and private sectors. And the DEF CON crew and the Franklin Project and my guest today, Jake Braun, put together, hello Jake, thanks for joining, put together the Hackers Almanack, and that's with the CK Almanack. For those searching, of course, I'll put links into the show notes for the PDFs and people can reference this later. Jake, thanks for joining me. Thanks for putting this document together. I was wondering, do you call it a guide? I guess it's an almanac. But thrilled to have you on the show. I'm excited to dig into some of the topics in there and what it's all about. Perhaps a few moments from you, kind of sharing some of the things you've been up to, working in government and the private sector, being part of DEF CON and knowing a lot of other cool people helping to save us from ourselves.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks for having me, Sean. So first off, my name is Jake Braun. I was most recently the acting principal deputy national cyber director in the White House, which means essentially I was the COO of the new cyber office they set up in the White House. That was actually created by an act of Congress during the Trump administration, the last Trump administration. But we didn't start hiring our first employees until Biden took office, and we were about 100 people when I left over the summer. Now I run a small consulting firm called Cambridge Global Advisors. We do a lot of work in cyber and other national security areas. And then I'm the executive director of the Cyber Policy Initiative at the University of Chicago, which is the entity that has partnered with DEF CON to do the Almanac and Project Franklin, et cetera, which I can go into the genesis of that and so on. If you want me to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, both the project and maybe an overview of the program at the university.
Sure.
Too. Yeah.
So it all kind of started. Well, really, it all started back with the voting machine hacking village at DEF CON in 2017. So myself and a few other folks, Hari Hursty, Matt Blaze, these are some pretty famous hackers in the hacker world. Came together to, after the 2016 election, to set out to research how insecurities in voting systems, and then publish reports that would that vendors, the government, and others could use to better secure our voting systems. And what was fascinating to us was just the deep chord that it struck with the hacker community. I remember, so for those of you who don't know, DEF CON happens in Las Vegas every year, not because the hackers like to go to Las Vegas. In fact, it's quite ironic because Vegas is a city built for people who don't understand math. And these are some of the most brilliant mathematicians and technologists you ever meet in your life. The reason it's there is out of tradition because it was somebody's birthday party there 33 years ago. And they kind of just kept going, meeting back in the same city after that. But anyway, so it's this massive hacker conference. About 30,000 hackers show up in Vegas every year, and at the conference, there's hundreds of talks on key discoveries that the hackers have made over the years that they'll often save up and then wait till DEF CON to release their finding from the last year. In fact, the old TV show Mr. Robot referred to it as the Hacker Olympics, I think, in an episode. But then there's also these rooms, and in each room, which they call a village, they hack a certain thing. So that thing could be anything from a car to a satellite in outer space to adult toys to a voting machine. So we set up the voting machine hacking village after the 2016 election. And as we're walking down the hallway, me and Hari, which is about 200 yards long, it was at Caesar's Palace, we see this row of people, 4 people deep, spanning 200 yards. So 4 people shoulder to shoulder, 200 yards. And Hari and I are kind of lumbering along. It was early in the morning for us in Vegas, which was about 11 a.m. And this is not a crowd that wakes up early. And we're walking along. We're like, what the hell are all these people in line for? And Hari's like, oh, I think the merch office is down here. I'm like, Hari, all these people aren't in line for merch at 11 o'clock in the morning. And so we tap some guy on the shoulder and say, hey, what are you in line for? And they're like, oh, the voting village. And we're like, oh my God. Like, and Jeff Moss, the founder of DEF CON, will tell you they had just never had a response like this to any village before. And what we came to believe over time was that it wasn't because hacking voting machines is particularly interesting. In fact, they're pretty basic devices that if you wanted to hack something interesting, you would do something other than a voting machine. It was because what we were doing was really striking at the core of these key ideals that we that are the foundation of our lives: democracy, human rights, individual rights, all these freedom. It's like if our voting process is messed up, then so are all of these other things that are things we count on to live the modern lives we live in non-authoritarian countries. And so fast forward a few years, about 6 months before I left the White House, I was talking to Jeff Moss, the founder of DEF CON, I think I mentioned, at the Munich National Security Conference, which is like the preeminent national security conference for all the senior most security people in the world, not just cybersecurity, but all types of security. So Zelensky spoke there that year. JD Vance spoke there this year. You get the senior of the senior most people. And so Jeff and I are talking, and he's like, hey, when you leave the White House, I want to do something like this again, build off what we did for the voting machine hacking village, but do it for all of DEF CON. And I was like, well, one of the most important things we did was we did this report out of the voting village so that there was something to memorialize the findings. And I was like, we should do that for all of DEF CON because DEF CON's got some interesting information. I mean, the findings and so on that come out of DEF CON are the types of things very few other organizations, conferences, whatever, are producing in any given year. And so we were like, well, if we would catalog these things, identify the top findings that have real policy implications, then we can put out a report really for policymakers about the technical findings at DEF CON and with some analysis of the policy implications of those findings so that policymakers around the world can actually have some sort of technical foundations for the policies that they're making. And we tied this in many ways back to how we thought about the voting machine hacking village. And frankly, these core concepts that come from, not to get too esoteric on you, but from the Enlightenment and, folks like Galileo and Hume and Kant and Benjamin Franklin, who I'll come back to in a second. But, it's interesting when you think about the Enlightenment, it was Galileo and these guys who first came up with these scientific findings and ideas about scientific method and in his case, all the physics and everything else. That really was the basis for the more philosophical and political movements that came later. And that's really how we kind of view our role here is these folks at DEF CON are really at the cutting edge of some of the most important technical findings in the security industry, not just cyber, but national security. And we want to make sure those findings are accessible to policymakers to help spur a greater policy development and so on and so forth, just like Galileo did for Kant and Franklin and so on.
And I just want to make one point, Jake, because on this point, the work being done all year, every year, culminating in DEF CON, which if you haven't been, listeners, you must go at least once to experience it. It's beyond something you've ever experienced. Marco and I cover it quite often. We love the villages. But the point I want to make is that the goal isn't to just find stuff that's bad and hope we fix it. It's to kind of reshape what we're doing with technology in the world and how it impacts us as a society. And I think if one thinks of technology and the risks involved and the impact it can have on the easy path is to look at healthcare and technology. But what you're describing is bigger, right? It's very societal, and I think people don't like laws and rules, but policy can help guide us, and policy needs to be informed by tech. And I remember walking through, I forget which year it was, but there was a whole contingent of policymakers and people from Capitol Hill looking at each of the villages. We spent a lot of time with them in the aerospace village and the maritime village and a lot of the ICS oriented type villages. It was impressive to see that community meeting with the hacker community to understand the technology, the risks, so they could to your point, be informed on policy so we can get ahead of the curve, not just play catch up here. So I wanted to highlight that for folks because it's not just a bunch of hackers releasing vulns that they found and 0 days that they finally got disclosed, hopefully fixed, right? Not just to catch news, but to actually do some good.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's, with this whole kind of frame that I just laid out, that's why we decided to call the project Project Franklin, because, Benjamin Franklin, as we know, was in some ways the pinnacle of the Enlightenment, but also more importantly embodies this idea of science and civics, all of his research on electricity and, creating bifocals and all these things, along with his work with the Constitutional Congress and Poor Richard's Almanack. So that's where the name from this came from is Benjamin Franklin, as you remember from high school civics, created Poor Richard's Almanack, which for his time was, an annual report that cataloged some key scientific findings relevant for folks. In this case, a lot of it was around weather and farming and so on, which was important to folks back then. I guess it still is today. And then also some political commentary. He was much funnier than we are. We tried to be funny a few times in the thing. I think he was far more successful. And so on. So we put out, so that's how we decided to call this the Hackers Almanack, and why we spelt it with the old English spelling ending with the CK as opposed to the modern spelling with no K. And then separately, by the way, I do want to mention that the Project Franklin has two pieces. One is the annual, well, that's redundant, the almanac, because almanacs are annual. Secondly, Franklin also created the first volunteer fire department in the United States. It was in Philly, which is where he lived, in the late 1700s. And by the way, that we didn't have a paid fire department in the United States for another century. And so we've also created, as the other part of Franklin, a volunteer group of folks that we recruit largely, but not exclusively, from DEF CON, who we provide to local water utilities because they're under such, not just increasing attack, but dramatic attack from groups like nation states and others, in particular China. We can talk about that later. But so we have this, we've already recruited over 350 folks. We have a pilot with 6 different utilities where we've deployed volunteers out to help them improve their cybersecurity and hoping to add a bunch more. So that's kind of what Project Franklin has become in the last 8-9 months since we launched it at DEF CON last year. It's the Hackers Almanack annually, and then this volunteer group of folks to support, for now, under-resourced water utilities, but we plan to expand to other under-resourced critical infrastructure.
Super cool. I didn't didn't even connect that to what we're going to talk about today. Maybe we have another chat on that whole project. In the meantime, you can share a link and we can include that for folks so they can learn about it.
Will do. Particularly any
yeah.
listeners who work in water, we would love them to reach out to us
Yeah.
and let us know if they want volunteers.
Yep, absolutely. So let's talk a bit more about the almanac. So I think you described the why and kind of the how it came together, which is, I guess, ultimately it's one, to capture what happened, two, to share that with others. Hopefully we can learn from it. What do you hope people do with it? Is there some outcome you expect? I think you said that it was written for policymakers, but from a broader perspective, what do you hope comes from this resource?
Yeah, while the kind of macro intent is that policymakers have actual technical grist to go behind their policymaking, we think that the content in here should be at the very least interesting, if not quite applicable to what a whole host of anybody who works in this field does. So, for example, we touch on some of the key issues in our field right now. So AI security is one, which I presume you want to go into more detail there at some point here. Two, ransomware attacks is another one that we spend a good amount of time on. Three is cybersecurity's impacts on the biomedical industry, which of course is something we all care about. And then we have a host of smaller findings or topics that we cover, but by smaller, I sometimes even those are massive aspects of industry and so on. Like, for example, the cybersecurity of our electronic vehicle infrastructure that we're building across the country right now. So it touches on all those things and more.
So let's start. The one that struck me, AI is everywhere, so we can come back to that one. Ransomware is the thing that never goes away. We can come back to that one. What struck me is the biohacking, and what struck me about it is the title. It was reversed: bioterrorism today and personalized medicine tomorrow. And I would think that the advancements in technology would be mostly about providing better patient care. And oh, by the way, we have some risks that may put people in harm's way, groups of people in harm's way. But the title leads with bioterrorism. So tell us a little bit about what that finding was and perhaps why that title was written that way.
Sure. So it was written for a couple findings that we kind of mashed together in that section. The main one being that the researchers at Four Vinegars Collective, I think is what they're called, had figured out with AI and some other capabilities the recipe, for a very dumbed down version of what they did, for different vaccines. In this case, hepatitis C was the main one they highlighted, but there were others. And they figured out how to make Hep C vaccine for, I think, a whole battery of medications for $400, when normally it would cost $82,000 to get the same level of vaccines. And the interesting thing was not only that they were able to do this, because entities, people who know what they're doing in this space, could make knockoff vaccines. They've been able to do that for years. That's not surprising. But what these folks were able to do was do it in such a simplified way that they could teach a non-technologist, maybe not completely non-technical, but somebody who's not a PhD in cybersecurity or whatever, to make these vaccines themselves. And then they coupled that with another section in the report, which is using 3D printing to make biomedical devices, particularly in areas where they don't have enough money or it's too hard to get these devices to. And so the question becomes, for years there's been a lot of reasons why they prohibited going generic or doing really reduced price or free vaccines when there's patents in place and so on and so forth. In the developing world or for deeply impoverished communities. However, now if you can kind of teach somebody who has some quasi level of expertise in technology to start making these vaccines, not for profit, but just to give out at cost or for free, and they can build their own or print their own devices to help make those medicines. Well, that's something quite different than what we've discussed until now. And by the way, according to researchers, a lot of this may fall under the umbrella of what's considered bioterrorism today. Making your own vaccines and so on and so forth and distributing them to people or letting people make them themselves. Folks could definitely interpret that as bioterrorism. And in fact, I think it has been interpreted as such to date. But they're saying, well, so be it. If this is going to help save lives, then we should just do it and let the chips fall where they may in terms of enforcement and so on. And so one of the things we call for is, should we be bringing in a group of NGOs that are helping people in very impoverished parts of the world and teach them how to do these things? Because otherwise they would have no vaccines. And maybe this is not the best option, but maybe it's better than no option at all. And so anyway, that was the overview of what was discussed.
Yeah, I love that. Let's talk about the policy bit of this for a moment. Yeah, so there's the patent piece. We can leave that to the side. But from a safety perspective, the FDA exists for a reason, right? And products go through lengthy tests, many years sometimes. Vaccine is the same. So I'm wondering what the policymakers' view of this particular finding is with respect to basically having, I don't know, do they put policy around this? Do they regulate it somehow, or does it become a free for all because somebody can make vaccines for their little community and it's off the grid, so to speak? I don't know. What are the thoughts there?
Right. Well, I mean, remember the term snake oil salesman comes from somebody selling fake medicine, which usually had booze or opium in it. Decades or not even centuries, maybe a century ago. And so the FDA exists for very good reason. And these companies like Pfizer and others are held to incredibly high standards for very good reasons. And, we've generally accepted that for decades now because we don't want, because we want high standards for our medications. That being said, there is still portions of the world where they can't get any of these medications, FDA or not. And so in areas where it's the choice between no Hep C vaccine because it's too expensive or whatever, or one that by all estimates, these folks say, will work. However, you don't have the same regulatory regime around. Again, it's worth considering whether these NGOs should be talking to folks in these populations that they're serving and decide whether this is something they want to think about endeavoring into. You kind of go back and forth. Well, is some of it going to be unsafe? Maybe, but if nothing, are a lot of these people going to die no matter what because of these diseases? The answer is yes. So, it's not an easy decision. It's very unfortunate they even have to have a conversation like this, but it is reality. And so if this is an option, it's worth considering. And again, I think this is where, there's a broader question here of, is there going to be kind of a monopoly on health that we have today on kind of major corporations that oversee, most aspects of our health, not just our medicine, but other types of care and so on that we get, um, and layered on top of that is insurance and everything else. Or if technology allows it, are we going to allow a more personalized, patient-driven um, uh, approach? And I think that's what these findings are really trying to get at. Like, should probably be having this conversation now about this more patient-driven approach versus the kind of industry monopoly approach that we've got now. And again, that monopoly is in place for some pretty good reasons, because those folks are held to really high standards and standards we want them held to. But there's other options that, I think are viable and worth discussing.
I love it. Let's I'm tempted to go to AI, but I want to shift to ransomware because I think it has had and continues to have a pretty big impact on society. What's that section about? Some of the findings there. I mean, it's really all about hackers stepping up where others haven't, right? So, what's going on there?
I know that the headline I had written before was government has failed, so hackers don cape and mask, as if they're superheroes charging
Right.
into the fight. Um, but a bunch of other people said no, that's too cute. Anyway, so I was overridden. Um, yeah, I think this is actually my favorite one out of all of them, because first off, when I was in the White House, and before that, when I was at Homeland Security, I mean, I sat in hundreds of hours of government meetings about ransomware. Everything from meetings with our tech folks, to meetings in the situation room, to meetings in with everybody you can imagine about what are we going to do about this, how do we get after these guys, et cetera. And look, the government does a lot of stuff around ransomware. They take down these folks' infrastructure. Sometimes, if it's high profile enough, they'll yank back payments. They indict these people. They rarely can arrest them because they're in countries like Russia that won't allow us to. But it's doing a lot. However, a lot isn't changing the outcome. Where ransomware is as bad or worse today than it's ever been, despite all this effort. And so it seems like we need at least a different approach, or more approaches, right? A plurality of or a multiplicity of approaches, not just the government option. So what this guy did, whose name I can never pronounce, so I'll find it in here at some point. Anyway, brilliant hacker.
It's Vangelis.
Vangelis, there you go.
Yes,
Thank you,
there you
Vangelis. Vangelis. Anyway, brilliant hacker. He infiltrated a ransomware group and hindered some of their activity. Now, let me preface this by saying we've had a policy in the federal government. I think most governments have this, not just the U.S., against what we call hackback. The private sector for years has wanted to be able to go use their cyber ninjas that are defending their systems and use those ninjas to go attack the folks who are attacking their systems. And of course, the national security establishment, the foreign policy establishment, has said absolutely not. There's no way you're allowed to do that. We have people who train their whole lives to prevent World War III and make sure that we live in a relatively peaceful world, which, we can complain all we want about how things are going right now, but we're not in World War III, so that's a positive. And so the idea that we're just going to allow a bunch of random companies to go attack these foreign adversaries who may or may not be attached to a foreign government, and that government may or may not believe that the U.S. government sanctioned these attacks, and then all of a sudden this spirals us into World War III. There's very good reasons we don't allow hackback. However, that's not what Vangelis did. What Vangelis did is he kind of threw a bunch of very clever attacks. No, I won't say attacks. Tactics. Kind of got his way into a few kind of the preeminent ransomware groups. And once he was in, he didn't like go burn down their infrastructure or anything. He just sat there and watched what they were doing. And over time, he was able to identify who they were going to attack next, and they would call up the potential victim and say, "Hey, you guys are in the crosshairs. You better back up your stuff, or improve your defenses, or whatever." And by his accounts, was able to stop multiple attacks. And so the question becomes like, well, look, he wasn't burning down these guys' infrastructure. He wasn't, putting all their passwords online or whatever. This was more like espionage. He was sitting there. He was like a night watchman or something. Or those guys, in the 80s who used to patrol the streets. They were like regular citizens. Well, that was in New York, I think, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So he's kind of more like one of those. And so, which, by the way, there's a long history of this in the United States. We used to deputize commercial shipping vessels to help deal with pirates in the Caribbean and so on and so forth. And so, like, it's not like this is totally uncharted territory for us. And so the question we're asking is like, look, do we need to employ tactics like this to help empower the civil society, and in particular the hacker community, to go monitor, infiltrate, and do notices or make folks aware of what these ransomware groups are doing, because the government just doesn't seem to be able to deal with the threat. And I would argue yes. I don't think what Vangelis did, or really any variation of what he did, is going to start World War III. And ransomware is not getting any better, so why not?
But it didn't, and I certainly don't want to oversimplify what he did, but it seems very connected to threat intelligence to me. So gathering information, analyzing it, using it to, we see it with the ISOs and the ISACs too, right? We see signs that this particular industry or these particular entities in an industry are being targeted, and here are the bad actors' tactics and techniques. Here's how we can better show ourselves up. So being inside maybe is what crosses the line, but what's coming out seems very much like traditional CTI, as I'm aware anyway.
Absolutely. It's the difference is that he was sitting inside of it, and he was giving away the information for free, to specific entities that were being targeted. But yeah, the concept is not novel in any way. The vantage point is what's novel, I guess.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the vantage point. Well, let's we have a couple minutes left. I know you have a hard stop. I want to talk. We can't skip it. We need to talk about AI. I remember AI Village. I don't know, maybe it was 10 years ago. It's something that DEF CON has been looking, maybe 9 years. I don't know. Something DEF CON's been looking at for a while. Tell me about this particular section of the almanac and what we can expect from there.
Yeah, so I think particularly for the folks who watch this might be the most relevant part of what we put out. Although that being said, I really encourage everybody to look through the whole thing. And by the way, it's a 20-some page report, but we wrote it for busy people to be able to skim. And if you find something interesting, you could read further. But it's not 20 pages of block text. There's a lot of headlines and bullets and bolds and so on, so you can easily pick out what you're interested in, what you're not. So obviously, AI is everywhere, and people are trying to figure out how to use it for their industry and so on. And the security is always a laggard, and that's no different here. Interestingly, though, what the AI Village folks came out to say, it comes from 3 years of trying to do AI red teaming. In fact, I think they changed the village's name in the last few years to be the AI Red Teaming Village. I think is what it's called, but they can correct me on that. I'm sure they will in the comments if I'm wrong. And after 3 years of trying to red team AI, the main guy, Sven, who's really this brilliant guy who's been running the village for years, uh, basically said, we don't even know how to define what AI red teaming is. We don't even know what harm we're trying to mitigate by red teaming AI. Uh, and so then I was actually the one who came up with the headline that says AI red teaming is bullshit, because really, there's a whole host of security companies that are out there, many of whom I'm sure listen to your show, and they should because it's a great show. But we're all kind of just making it up. There's no industry standard for this. Folks who are buying AI red teaming, uh, you know, should know that whatever they're buying may or may not be useful, and there's really nobody out there saying like, oh yeah, this group has benchmarked their red teaming tactics against industry standard, and therefore if you company are buying this, then you're getting something that matches to that. It's not true. Everybody's just making it up. And it's
Snake
fun
oil.
but,
Snake oil.
yes. I don't want to disparage my colleagues out there, but they're just making it up. And look, I mean, in the environment we're in, that's kind of all you can do is make it up. But folks buying this stuff should know that everybody's just making it up at this point. So the main point that we make out of this is first off, acknowledging the problem. Nobody really knows what this is, and then saying to both industry leaders and government and academic leaders, look, folks need to come together quickly and derive industry standards for this, because right now, I mean, let me ask you, like, if you say you're red teaming AI, are you red teaming the ChatGPT app on my phone? Are you red teaming like the software at OpenAI that it runs on? Are you red teaming the servers that it runs on? Or are you red teaming the algorithm and the data, or the
data set,
the data that's going in and out of the algorithm? No one can answer that question. I think what we generally mean is we're red teaming the outputs of the algorithm, and thus the algorithm, because in theory, OpenAI and Meta and these guys should be red teaming their own software, and they should be red teaming their own hardware, and they've got lots of money to do that. So I don't think that's what we're talking about. Some industry, government, academic consortium needs to come out and actually say that's not what we're talking about. And then we need to get after defining, okay, what does red teaming an algorithm mean? I think there's a lot of people who have some very good ideas on what this means, like, garbage in, garbage out. What data do they use to make the model? Are the weighting measurements and so on they're using for the model, do they remain consistent over time? Have they changed? Do the values within the data that's come in, have those changed, which could then alter the information that comes out? Blah, blah, blah. There's a million different things to look at.
But we don't been poisoned, data been poisoned. Yeah.
All that type of stuff.
Endless list of stuff.
There is. Well, actually, so that's an interesting point. I don't know if it's an endless list, and I think we probably need to think through there must be some finite list of at least categories, and so why don't we start to enumerate those first? Like in typical red teaming, what are you going to look at? Like, what assets are on the network? What software is running or trying to run on the network? Are there secure configurations? Basic controls, blah, blah. Okay, so what are those for AI and or AI algorithms? And we haven't even, as an industry, started to define those yet, but we need to quickly, so that the folks who want their stuff to be secure, which I believe is everyone, can bring in groups that can know what they mean when they say, I want my AI to be secure.
Yep, absolutely. I have a gazillion thoughts on this. We're out of time. I'm going to give a quick shout out to the OWASP organization. They're doing a lot of work in this space of AI, and I think they give that list that you're speaking to, at least from an application development perspective. And I've had a few chats with that team, so I'd encourage everybody to listen to those and form your own opinion, look at your own resources, but there's a good set from them. Jake, I know you have to run. Any final words on this? Of course, I'm going to put links to the almanac. I encourage everybody to read it. To your point, it's very, very easy read. A lot of cool information in there. good stuff with Franklin Project. Maybe you'll join me again. To chat about that. Any other final thoughts from you?
Well, first off, we're going to do one this coming year. We'd love people's thoughts on, what we should be looking at, topics or particular talks are going to happen at DEF CON, or anything that you want us to look at for next year's Almanac. So would love folks' thoughts on that. You can message us or whatever. That's thing one. Thing two, I'd strongly encourage folks to sign up to volunteer on at DEF CON Franklin's website, which it sounds like you're going to put in the link. We're always looking for more volunteers, particularly for these underserved water utilities. Look forward to joining you when the next Almanac comes out, or maybe before.
Yep, absolutely. Both are true. Jake, thanks a million. Thanks for putting that together. Thanks for the team that supported you, the researchers that found the findings in the first place and shared them with us. And to everybody listening and watching, thanks for joining me. Please do share with your friends and enemies, subscribe, share your thoughts with Jake and I, and we'll see you all on the next one. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me, Sean.
You bet.
This is a special announcement. We are heading to RSA Conference in San Francisco for our 11th years of coverage, April 28, May 1st.
And as always, we're bringing you keynotes, conversations with organizers, speakers, industry leaders, plus the latest insights from the world of cybersecurity.
And we'll reconnect with old friends, meet new ones, and of course, we want you and your company to join us.
We have a few spots left for full sponsorship and our on-location briefings. You can book yours now at itspmagazine.com/RSAC.
We're going.
And you're coming with us.